In our All-Star Roundtable this week, Dale Butland, Communications Director for Innovation Ohio, a progressive think tank, and Chris Littleton, speaking for Ohioans for Healthcare Freedom. Your first time on our show, welcome. So we'll let you start out, and why don't you tell us what it is about Issue 3 that you are pushing for?
Sure. We want to amend the Ohio Constitution to ensure health care freedom for all Ohioans. What that means for us is that we'd like to address the individual mandate from the federal health care bill that came down. We want to challenge that and say that you can't compel people by law, by force, through taxation, to purchase health care through compulsory means. And the second thing we want to do is make sure that Ohio never becomes a state like Massachusetts where that same thing takes place, that there's a state-based health care plan and that through compulsion you're forced to participate in a plan like that. So that's what we hope to do.
What you were opposed to then is the fact that the government could come in and mandate that you have to buy health care.
Correct. Government controlling your day-to-day decisions in health care, we believe that should be between patients and doctors and should have nothing to do with politicians or bureaucrats.
And Dale, your side is really hoping that Issue 3 does not go through. What are your problems with Issue 3?
Well, in the first place, it has nothing to do, Issue 3 has nothing whatsoever to do with what Chris and his Tea Party friends call Obamacare. It will have absolutely no impact because the fate of Obamacare, as they call it, will be decided by the U.S. Supreme Court under the Supremacy Clause of Article 6 of the Constitution. But what this is about extremists attempting to insert a Trojan horse into the Ohio Constitution that will jeopardize and invalidate literally dozens of already existing Ohio laws and regulations and destroy our ability to protect the vulnerable, to ensure public health, or even to regulate the medical and insurance industries.
What kind of laws do you think are at risk with this? I mean, if it's a single issue, what do you think would be the fallout that we don't anticipate?
This is not just me who thinks this. We actually enlisted a couple of very well-regarded law professors from Case Western University. They've looked at the language, and here's the problem. It's so sloppily and ambiguously worded that, for example, I'll just give you one example. It says that you can't force anyone to participate in a healthcare system. If you cannot force someone to participate in the healthcare system, how do courts force deadbeat parents to buy health insurance for their children? How do Ohio colleges require students to have insurance as a condition of enrollment? Why couldn't any of us simply refuse to pay taxes for the hospital and the MRDD levies that are passed? At the very least, these would inspire legal challenges. There would be a tsunami of lawsuits, and the taxpayers would be on the hook to pay for it.
What about the federal supremacy, the fact that this is a federal law, and Ohio wouldn't legally be able to preempt it?
Yeah, we're not trying to preempt a federal law. In fact, this will never deal with the Supremacy Clause in any way. Our challenge will go forward as a citizens' rights issue to make sure that the U.S. Supreme Court hears the best possible case to question the individual mandate to question the constitutionality of the individual mandate. If that is struck down, we will never have even made an argument that has anything to do with the Supremacy Clause, and that won't present a problem for us at all. So, yes, we do hope to affect the federal health care law through legal means, through the U.S. Supreme Court. We know that's where we're going to end up. But to address a couple of the things that Dale said, this is, unfortunately, it sounds a lot like scare tactics and some things that have walked through focus groups to try and frighten people, but we can look at the reality of this. I don't have to deal in what was supposed to happen. We've seen this law or something similar to it play out in multiple states, and we haven't seen these scenarios come to fruition. I prefer to deal in fact, in absolute reality, and what we do see is what happened in Massachusetts when this type of a system was brought to that state. The highest premiums, the highest cost of insurance in the entire country, and rising faster than the national average. So that's something that we should really focus on, that this hasn't addressed cost concerns in that state, which is what healthcare reform should be doing, and that's the kind of thing we support with regards to healthcare reform. Unfortunately, mandating and forcing people to participate in something that the government defines for you is completely inappropriate and is a fundamental inhibition of personal freedom.
Dale, poll after poll shows, though, that people are opposed to mandates in health care. This isn't something that people have embraced, that voters want to see. So why is it that you're not getting maybe what voters are saying, which is we don't want to have mandated health care?
Let me try this one more time, Colleen. This amendment, this proposed amendment to the Ohio Constitution, has nothing to do with the Affordable Care Act, or what they call Obamacare. That will not be decided by a ballot initiative in Ohio or any other state. Now, Chris says he'd like to deal in facts, so let's do a fact. Every single major newspaper in this state, every single one, whether they're conservative, liberal, middle of the road, have all looked at this amendment. They have all urged voters to vote no on issue 3. Now, it's the first time in modern political history, so far as I know, that every single major newspaper in the state have spoken with a single voice on a controversial ballot issue. When that happens, I think it's reasonable for voters to conclude there's something wrong with the amendment. Now, one last thing I want to say. Chris says, oh no, we're not saying that this amendment, even if we pass it, would invalidate the Supremacy Clause, right? Except, Chris, you have a campaign that is stuffing Ohio mailboxes with something that says very differently. I've got in my hand here a couple of things that have just started hitting Ohio mailboxes yesterday.
That are not from our campaign.
Excuse me, Chris, these are people paying for your campaign. This is FreedomWorks, who is doing all your signs in Cleveland. I saw them with my own eyes last week. This one is from some shadowy outfit in Virginia that says, yes on issue 3 means that Obamacare will be illegal in our state. That is a lie, Chris, and you know it's a lie. And it seems to me, at the very least, you ought to be dissociating yourself from this kind of activity.
I'd be happy to disassociate myself from FreedomWorks because that's not my organization. So we can have them on. You should. They can defend themselves, and I think that's a good thing to do. But, well, hang on. Let's stick with the substance here because I think you make an interesting point when it comes to the editorial boards. Point number one for me is that I think that people are smart. I think that voters are smart. I think that they're intelligent, and they'll make decisions for themselves. They don't need newspapers to tell them. But if that's the case, and going by your own logic, are you prepared to endorse issue 2 tonight? Because those same editorial boards are advocating for issue 2, and I know issue 3 has nothing to do with issue 2, but by your logic, if voters are to be swayed by editorial boards, I think you'd have to embrace the idea that they did the same exact thing for issue 2.
Except there's one big difference, Chris. There hasn't been a unanimous run. The editorial boards are all over the lot on issue 2. The Akron Beacon-Journal said no on issue 2. The Toledo Blade said no on issue 2, and so on and so forth. In this case, every single one has said no. I think the Youngstown Vindicator probably put it best. They said about your amendment, it is not just a futile political posture. It is wasteful and potentially destructive.
You know, Mike DeWine, the Attorney General, is part of a 26-state group that is challenging Obamacare, for want of another word, the Health Care Act, as a group, and saying, as states, this group of states, we do not want it. Wouldn't it be more prudent to allow this to be played out in the arena where it's going to have the ultimate decision anyway, which is the courtroom?
Yeah, I agree that there's going to play out in the courtroom, but that's the unique part of what this does. This gives us a very unique route to have a very important rights-based case heard at the U.S. Supreme Court. We want to say very fundamentally that the federal government is actually inhibiting our ability to control our own fate with regards to both liberty and property. They're fundamentally inhibiting those things, and that's outlined in the U.S. Constitution. So we're going to have that rights-based case. Specific to the editorial boards, because I think I like the point that Dale makes, we talk about why they did things. The Cleveland Plain Dealer, in their endorsement that went the other direction, starts talking about the idea of universal health care as their default position. So I'm not surprised that an editorial board whose default position is the support of universal health care would not believe that I want to protect health care freedom and protect individual choice and liberty for individuals when making their health care decisions. That's not a surprise.
But the problem, Chris, the Columbus Dispatch, the Cincinnati Enquirer, the Canton Repository, all papers that made it very clear they do not want to see the Affordable Care Act put into law, said you should vote no on issue 3 because of the consequences that would occur to Ohio. Let me give you one other example, Colleen, and I urge all the viewers to please go to innovationohio.org. You can go to our issue 3 resource center and read the amendment with your own eyes. The second and third provisions of this say, and I'm quoting it directly, Ohio cannot prohibit the sale of health care or health insurance or have any penalties for doing so. Think about that for a minute. If we cannot prohibit the sale of anything that someone might call health care, how do we prohibit unlicensed doctors from peddling quack remedies? If we can't prohibit the sale of certain kinds of insurance, how do we stop con men from preying on senior citizens and selling them policies that are overpriced and substandard? We have a number of laws and regulations in Ohio that are specifically designed to prevent this kind of abuse. Chris says that we don't want Ohio to become Massachusetts. The problem is, if this thing passes, Ohio can't continue being Ohio.
Which, of course, is fundamentally inaccurate because nothing changes prior to March of 2010. He neglects to mention that when he talks about the scare tactics that he's trying to employ. Dale's fundamental position always revolves around the idea that government knows better than me how to manage my own life. Well, I don't think that. I think that an individual knows better than government, knows better than a disassociated, disconnected individual how to manage my own life and manage my own health care decisions. So I'll err on the side of freedom every single time because I believe in that Ohioan to make the right decisions for themselves.
And we are almost out of time. In fact, we are out of time. Each of you give me one sentence, your final sentence to Ohio voters.
I would quote the Youngstown Vindicator again. Issue 3 is not just futile political posturing, it is wasteful and potentially destructive. This would fundamentally alter the Ohio Constitution and take away our ability to protect vulnerable people, to regulate the medical and insurance professions, and to ensure public health. That's a disaster. It should not be in the Constitution.
Rather than listen to someone who has an agenda, think for yourself. Learn more at yesonissue3.com. Read the amendment and make that interpretation for yourself. Very simple. I trust Ohio voters on this to make a decision that protects their choices for health care freedom, to keep it between patients and doctors and not at all with politicians.
The biggest newspapers in Ohio do not have an agenda, Chris, and they have all said voters should vote no on Issue 3.
We really are out of time. Gentlemen, thank you both very much, and we know you will be making this important decision, and we will be right back.